Everyone to this morning's committee hearing. We do have a quorum. I'm joined by Councilmember Jan Perry, Councilmember Ed Reyes, Councilmember Richard Alarcon. Today is Wednesday, April 28th. We have a few items that are on the consent calendar that I'd like to try to quickly dispense with. Ms. Sauer, if you could read items 1 through 4.
All right. Item 1, CRA report relative to the status of its quarterly investments as of December 31st, 2009.
Okay, on item 1, we will adopt the CRA report. Item 2.
CRA report and CLA report relative to repealing CRA policies concerning downtown rooftop signage and downtown skyline signage, records management, and reimbursement to commissioners.
Okay, on item 2, we'll adopt the CLA report. Item 3.
CRA and CAO reports and resolution relative to issuing tax-exempt multifamily housing revenue bonds in an amount not to exceed $14 million on behalf of Buckingham Senior Apartments LP for the Buckingham Senior Apartments project, and amending a settlement agreement related to the project located at 4020 Buckingham Road.
Okay, on item 3, we'll adopt the CAO report. That brings us to item 4.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I just need to say something at the end on item 4.
On item 4?
Yeah.
Okay, you want to say it now?
Yeah, I can do that. I just wanted to make a motion to approve the CDD report and recommendation number 1 of the CAO report.
Okay, Madam Clerk, why don't you read the item?
Okay.
That's okay.
CDD and CAO reports relative to negotiating and executing a city loan contract in an amount up to $2.2 million to assist the Pacific Center Place project, an industrial complex located at 812 East 59th Street, and related actions.
Okay, and if you could, Ms. Perry, repeat your amendment.
I just wanted to make a motion to approve the Community Development Department report and recommendation number 1 of the Chief Administrative Office report.
Okay, then, without objection, we'll adopt the CAO report with the...
I believe there was another amendment.
I'm getting ready to... We'll adopt the CAO report, and recommendation 2, and which has an amendment. Also factored into that will be Ms. Perry's amendment.
Okay.
Okay?
So 2F, authorize the general manager, CDD, or designee to negotiate and execute an amendment to implement agreement number 4 of the master reprogramming agreement, contract number 111242, with the CRA, with assistance from the CLA and CAO to explore options to repay approximately $2.6 million community development block grant loan provided for acquisition of the project site, including modified repayment terms or repayment if project is sold or transferred, subject to review and approval of the city attorney as to form and legality.
Fine. All right. So without objection, those items will be deemed approved. Before we go to, item 5, we have some public comment cards. And so what we'll do is we will we'll deal with the public comment now. That's D. Weekly, Debbie Burton, Alma Sosito. Please come forward.
Councilmember, pardon the interruption. On item number 4, would you mind clarifying what actions the committee just took in regards to the CAO report and/or Councilmember Perry's amendment?
Well, let me ask the CLA's office to restate
this.
The action that we took on item 4.
It was to approve the CAO report, recommendation 2, as amended, to include F.
Because I said number 1. That's probably why you said. So does that mean 1 and 2? I said 1. Is that why you're confused?
Didn't you approve the CDD report with
Okay,
recommendation 1 of the CAO report?
Let's do this. Why don't we just hold that for a minute, and if we could get with Ms. Perry's, clarify that, and before the meeting is over, we will have all of that worked out. Okay, so that brings us again to public comment. Dee Weekly, Debbie Burton, and Alma Salcido. Please.
Good morning, ma'am, sirs. My name is Dee Weekly. I thank you, Mr. Alietti and Councilmember Wesson, for April the 14th and at least coming out to hear our concerns. I'm a resident of downtown Los Angeles, and I fully support Councilmember Alarcon's motion to enact a one-year moratorium on all rent increases to RSO units. Up to this point in time, my rent has increased every year, while my income has remained the same. Councilmember Alarcon's motion is a very important first step in reforming the LARSO to protect and actually stabilize our housing, particularly for those of us like me who depend on stabilized, affordable housing to stay out of the homelessness. It is crucial that this motion be calendared and acted upon in the Housing Committee no later than May the 5th. Time is of the essence, and we need the council resolution now before the city starts its budget process for the next fiscal year. While the landlords and their attorneys work on money, we fight for our humanity.
I understand and appreciate that. And Mr. Alarcon and I are trying to work out some hybrid of his request, for lack of a better word. That's what I'll call it. We recognize that there's a time concern, and we will try to meet that deadline, and then we will put it before our other colleagues and see if we can market it. So we are in the process of trying to make something happen. So with that,
Good morning. My name is Debbie Burton, and a longtime resident of downtown Los Angeles and a member of LA CAN. I fully support Councilmember Alarcon's motion to enact a one-year moratorium on our rent increases to RSO units. This motion represents a positive step towards reestablishing a balance between the needs of tenants and landlords. And this time of economic crisis, it is the majority of tenants in Los Angeles that is hit the hardest, particularly those of us who are low income. Collectively, we have been struggling for years, and the current crisis pushes us to the breaking point of instability and homelessness. It is very important that this motion be calendared and enacted upon in the Housing Committee by May 5th. Any delays in this committee action would allow landlords who are already doing well to raise everyone's rents by July 1st. Once again, I fully support Councilmember Alarcon's motion from here. It is important that Councilmember Weston calendar this motion in HCED to begin the process of making this a reality. Thank you.
Hola,
Yeah.
buenos días. Mi nombre es Alma Salcido y soy residente de Boyle Heights, LA.
My name is Alma Salcido. I'm a resident of Boyle Heights and a member of Unión de Vecinos.
Soy miembro de la Unión de Vecinos y solamente estoy el día de hoy para hacer una sola pregunta. Si ya está incluida en la agenda.
I am here today to ask that it be put on the agenda.
La moción del concejal señor Alarcón
Councilman Alarcon's motion
sobre el congelamiento de la renta.
Regarding the moratorium on rent hikes.
Es muy importante, nos urge que sea incluida.
It's very important to us and very urgent to us that this is included on the agenda.
Por la situación económica por la cual estamos pasando ahorita todas las personas de bajos recursos.
Considering the economic conditions, especially for low-income families.
Así que esperamos su respuesta y que sea incluida a la brevedad posible.
We look forward to your response in putting this on the agenda.
Gracias.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Mr. City Attorney, I think we've got it sorted out on item 4. Can we shift back to that? Okay, it says on 4, we would adopt the CAO report with recommendation 1, like Ms. Perry suggested, and the amendment is to 1F.
That is correct.
So does that clarify for you, Mr. City Clerk? Okay. Next, we have, thank you, guys, I'm sorry. Elizabeth Blaney, Hilda Garcia, Laura Quadros. Please come forward.
Good morning. My name is Elizabeth Blaney. I'm a resident of Boyle Heights. I'm also a member of Unión de Vecinos. And I'm here also to urge you to please put Councilman Alarcon's motion on the agenda by next Wednesday. Time is of the essence here. You mentioned that there was a hybrid. We would be interested in knowing what the hybrid would be. We have many members from our tenants union with Unión de Vecinos who've been calling the office. One other thing I would like to mention, I appreciate your efforts for translation, Councilman Wesson, but we have had, when we've had some of our members calling, saying that they haven't been able to leave their comments because there hasn't always been someone in your office who could speak Spanish. And we just want to make sure that those comments are being recorded because it's very important to tenants that this get on the agenda for next Wednesday. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sí, hablo, buenos días. Yo soy la señora Hilda García, pertenezco a la Unión de Vecinos. Yo quiero hablar por todos los pobres de Los Ángeles, los que no tenemos para pagar rentas, y quisiera que el señor Alarcón nos hiciera el favor de apuntar en su agenda que congelen las rentas.
My name is Hilda Garcia. I am a member of Unión de Vecinos. I am here to speak on behalf of all of us tenants because we don't have more rent that we can pay.
Es lo que queremos que haga. Que él que ponga en la agenda para que congelen las rentas.
So what we're asking is that you please include this moratorium to freeze the rents on the agenda.
Ya es todo.
That's all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Somebody missing?
I think she's in the restroom. So.
Okay, well, when she comes back, if you'd like, wave, we'll bring her up. Claudia Gomez and AJ?
Hi, good morning. My name is Claudia Gomez, and I'm here back. I'm here to let you know and ask you if you can put in this Wednesday in your agenda the motion, Mr. Alarcon, because it's really important for us and for the low-income families, and hopefully you can put it in the agenda. Thank you so much.
Thank you. AJ?
Good morning. My name is AJ Cariaga. I'm a new disabled vet. I've joined the fixed income people. There's millions of us vets here in America now, and the biggest collective of them are here in Los Angeles, according to the numbers that I've read. We're on fixed income. We need to control our housing. We have a 5th floor at the Weingart Center that is loaded with disabled vets that are waiting for a good break somewhere so they can get some adequate housing on that fixed income. And it's a very sad situation that we're in right now. Whatever goes up for us here goes up to the national level for our cost of living adjustment. And I think we need to control all of that here at the lower level where it starts. So I would like to urge you all to commit yourself to, put a cap to all of this.
Thank you, AJ.
Thank you, sir.
Now, lastly, I have Damon. And how's your daughter, Maria Rodriguez and Thelma Perez? And how is she?
She's doing good. She's in school right now. So.
As she should be.
Yeah, you're right. Unfortunately, sometimes the schools are just not the greatest.
Yeah.
So, good morning. Devin Corona, member of Comunidad Presente. And we're here again, and it seems like it's becoming redundant over and over. We're hoping that this can also get on the agenda ASAP. We would like to hear about what this hybrid's about. We haven't really had a discussion around that, so maybe after this meeting, if someone from your office could actually talk to us about what that looks like. And I also just want to give props to everyone, well, to both y'all, Herb Wesson and Alarcon, for first hosting the 14th meeting, which was great, and also for the hard-hitting questions you did with the Landlord Association, which I think we saw that some of the numbers were being manipulated. I just want to urge you all not to fall back on the pressure that's being given. I know AGLA is very well funded and organized. We are well organized ourselves, and we're trying to build momentum towards this. So please don't fall back on this political pressure. Let's talk about what this hybrid's about. We're always willing to figure out what are some other alternatives, but it's a discussion we need to have, and we just need this moratorium to pass to start discussing around the policy. So that's basically it, and just say hi to Ed. You're my council member, and I hope we can get your support.
Well, I will, by tomorrow, maybe, if all goes well, we'll be able to call someone from your operation to give them an outline of what we're discussing. I need to have another conversation with Mr. Alarcon, and I need to check with, not to put you on the spot, I need to really have a discussion with Mr. Reyes and seek his wisdom and counsel to see if this can be done. And I'm just trying to come up with something because I do know we're up against the clock. So, if all, keep your fingers crossed, if all works well, maybe we have something that we might be able to market to the other members. So it's going to take more than just a handful of us.
I agree.
Okay? Who's next?
María Rodríguez.
Yes, Ms. Rodriguez.
Mi nombre es María Rodríguez, vengo de Boyle Heights, pertenezco a la Unión de Vecinos.
My name is Maria Rodriguez. I come from Boyle Heights, and I belong to Unión de Vecinos.
Y aunque suena muy repetitorio, pero vengo pidiendo lo mismo que mis demás compañeros.
I know it probably sounds repetitive, but I'm here to ask the same thing that my friends have been asking.
Que el señor Wesson nos ponga en la moratoria, por favor, de la agenda del miércoles.
That Councilman Wesson, if you would please put on the agenda the motion for the moratorium next Wednesday.
El congelamiento de la renta.
It's the moratorium regarding the rent freeze.
Porque esto ayudaría a cientos y miles de personas o miles de familias de aquí del condado de Los Ángeles y alrededores donde está el control de renta.
Because this will help thousands of families in the city of Los Angeles regarding their rents.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you, and we've been joined by Councilmember Cardenas.
Good morning, council members. My name is Delmi Perez. I'm a resident of Koreatown. I also belong to Comunidad Presente, as well as the Los Angeles Housing Preservation Alliance, which stretches from Venice all the way to East LA. So we represent a large majority of tenants from across the city. We're here basically to urge you to put this moratorium on the HC agenda by the 5th of May. With all due respect, this hybrid sounds interesting. I've heard some rumors that it's about the income levels of tenants across the city, who should be on the moratorium and who shouldn't. But I really want to urge you to really think about the economic times that we're in right now, which affects people of all income levels, people from across the city, rich to poor, and especially the poor in Los Angeles. So I really want to urge you to put this on the agenda now, to pass this moratorium now, and then to talk about the details of what reform to the LARSA would look like. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And let me clarify, we're going to have members of the staff have discussions with Mr. Reyes to seek their counsel and with the city attorney. So that's what's going to happen. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Alarcon.
I just want to say that one of the problems that we're having is to recognize that the July 1st is coming very quickly, and we may have to do something to that the majority of the council will appreciate, but it's not looking at the entire year, so that we can have more of a transition to really dig deep and do the research that the council members would feel comfortable with. So that's basically what we're talking about. It's nothing more than that. Giving us more time, but at the same time, maybe imposing a shorter term rent freeze.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay. That brings us to item 5, I believe.
CRA and CLA reports relative to a master cooperation agreement with the LA Housing Department for the city's Affordable Housing Trust Fund program.
We did. Yeah, because
She's over there, we're over here.
good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Anne Marie Sauer with the CLA. The item before you is a request from the agency to negotiate and execute an amended and restated master cooperation agreement between the CRA and the Housing Department regarding the agency's contribution to the city's Affordable Housing Trust Fund. The current agreement ended in March 2008. Since 2008, staff from the CRA, Housing, City Attorney, and our office met several times to negotiate the terms of an extended agreement to govern the agency's contribution. I'm just going to focus on some of the main points of our recommendations. We're recommending a term of March 15th, 2008 through June 30th, 2013. Regarding the formula for calculating the 5% contribution, currently the CRA contributes 5% of the gross tax increment, TI, and bond proceeds, minus legal obligations, AB 1290 funds, and county administrative costs. What we're recommending is when bonds are not issued, 5% of the gross TI minus legal obligations, the AB 1290 funds, county administrative costs, and debt service. The change from the prior agreement till now is based on the fact the city attorney opined that the agency cannot allocate bond proceeds to the city for expenditure through the trust fund. So what we're saying in terms of when tax allocation bonds are issued, the agency would be required to propose a contribution to the trust fund from the project area's TI that's either 5% of the bond proceeds or does not deduct the debt service from the bonds from the 5% calculation. Regarding the contributing project areas, currently 23 of the 30 active project areas contribute to the trust fund. We're recommending, the CRA had proposed removing 6 low revenue generating project areas and including 2 newly established project areas. That's the city center and central industrial. And that's what we've recommended. If a project area has a $0 or a negative balance after accounting for operating costs and the 5% contribution, the CRA may apply for a waiver for the affected project area, which is subject to council approval. In terms of the use of the funds, we recommend that funds be restricted to use in the project area in which they were generated during the first 2 years of the agreement. During the second 2 years of the agreement, there can be a regional use of those funds. And during the 5th year, that's fiscal year 2012-13, funds would return to the agency for redevelopment activities. While discussions were occurring, the state took action to require the CRA to contribute to the Education Revenue Augmentation Fund, the ERAF. To date, the agency hasn't been required to remit funds to the state as part of ERAF. However, should that occur, we are allowing the agency to request a waiver for the affected project area, again, subject to council review and approval. Attachment B of our report includes additional recommendations as well as amendments that are intended to streamline administration of the 5% funds and or memorialize current practices. I also submitted a technical correction to the clerk so that the formula that's in our report matches the language that's in attachment B of the report. And obviously the CRA and Housing and I are here to answer any questions.
You want to make a...
Certainly. I'll be brief. Rushmore Cervantes with the Housing Department. Ms. Sauer is correct. The two departments negotiated great lengths, and I would like to thank the Chief Legislative Analyst Office. They did a yeoman's job in bringing us to the table and negotiating what you have before you. There were several key components that the CRA and Housing Department were of difference of opinion. Primarily, the major one was the funding formula. The Housing Department, of course, is sympathetic to the CRA's issues relative to the amount of money that could be taken by the state. At the same time, the Housing Department has a mission to provide affordable housing. So at this point, we've accepted what the CLA has proposed for you this morning, and we're pleased to move forward.
Mr. Alacon, and then Mr. Cardenas.
I have,
Oh, yeah, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry.
That's all right. Delilah Sotelo with the CRA. I just have a couple of comments. I did want to highlight some of the work that Anne Marie did. We handed out an attachment today that basically summarizes the 8 major deal points and tries to show you the difference between what the CRA board proposed in its transmittal versus what the CLA recommendation is. We are very supportive of the CLA recommendation. While it does reflect compromise to what the board required and requested, it also is reflective and recognizes the constraints that we face between the ERAF take of $85 million, which happened in fiscal year 10 alone, to the declining revenues based on projections on the reducing property taxes. Our budget has been decimated, and the CLA really made provisions within its recommendations for us to come back to City Council and request a waiver of the contribution when, in fact, the budget take is significant and when a project area can no longer operate based on reduced revenues. We also handed out for you, based on the new formula, the calculation for fiscal year 10. The approximate change in fiscal year 9 is about $1 million. Based on the average per unit subsidy that LHD provides its recipients, which is about $70,000 per unit, the $1 million reduction represents about 15 units. In fiscal year 10, the formula that we provided to the CLA, and I believe has been handed out this morning, shows a more substantial drop, only because it does reflect the projections given to us by KMA and the projections that are based on reduced revenues from property taxes. So it doesn't really account for, or it doesn't really hinge on the new versus old formula, but rather the projections and the reduction in tax increment based on declining property values. So I did want to point that out. Overall, the MOU allows for the CRA to continue our contribution to the fund and the collaboration with LHD. Since fiscal year 03, we have contributed $52.7 million to the fund, of which $45.7 million has been committed by LHD. We believe that the collaboration that we've had in these last couple of years, which has committed about $25 million of that in the last 2 years alone, is testament to our ability to work together in the next 3 years to ensure the development of affordable housing. So I did want to recognize that. And I also want to recognize the flexibility that this MOU creates to not only use the dollars within the project areas, but also creates the flexibility to use them in neighboring project areas if indeed it's necessary. So we're appreciative of the CLA recommendations, and we hope that this meets your approval.
Mr. Alacon.
yes, I have two concerns. Number one, the 2-year requirement to expend it in the project areas. I don't think any money has been spent within 2 years since this program has started, at least in my project area. So that's sort of a patronizing rhetoric as part of this agreement, but in reality, it doesn't happen. So it's likely that the money would be spent outside of the area, and I don't know why it wouldn't just be a 5-year requirement that the money be spent in the areas where they are taken. Secondly, I have, and frankly, I'm inclined to move that we pull my project area out of this agreement and work on a carve-out agreement because it has such a harsh impact on the northeast San Fernando Valley, and is literally just a taking of money from the northeast San Fernando Valley, when in fact the CRA was established to do quite the opposite. Secondly, I don't understand why we have to take the 5% out of the tax increment when it should come out of the 20% housing set-aside portion of the CRA's budget. So it's a double hit. First you take 5% out of the tax increment, then you take it out of the economic development money, that is much needed, particularly during these dire times. And I want to state for the record that I've sent a letter to Austin Butner asking exactly this question. Why are we taking economic development dollars when we need jobs and putting it into housing dollars and not even in those areas that the money is designed to be spent in? So I didn't get a sufficient answer for why we can't take the 5% out of the 20%, or an equivalent amount out of the 20% as opposed to taking it out of the tax increment, the 80%.
The CRA 20% is for housing. The Housing Department obviously receives home dollars as well. It was at that time that the decision was made to allocate 5% from the 80% was that to bolster the Affordable Housing Trust Fund to try to achieve the most amount of affordable housing.
Well, that was then. I'm asking for why we can't do it differently now.
Certainly. It's just another pot of money above and beyond the 20% that CRA has, and that was the initial intent. As it relates to the time it takes for funds to be spent in the project area.
No, that's not my question right now. My first question, I want to get an answer to the second part of this, why it cannot be taken. The question was why it cannot be taken, not why it is taken, but why it cannot be taken out of the 20% set aside.
Councilman, that indeed is a policy question. It's a policy question.
So then it could be taken out of the
Mayor,
out of the 20%.
City Council.
That would be my recommendation in my motion.
My only caveat is that we have to, unlike the 5% money, which is categorized as housing money and should be treated as such, and under this MOU, all our housing policies apply and all our various CRA policies apply. Because it then becomes more of a regulatory requirement to really treat it as housing money. Rents under the CRL would have to be charged, and all regulatory provisions would have to be executed if we were to do that by whoever would distribute that money. So we do it versus LHD. LHD would have to follow all our rules and regulations.
So we do it under CRA's rules instead of housing's rules. That's fine. It still goes into the trust fund. That's the bottom line. Was the purpose for this was to put it into the trust fund to bolster the trust fund and get it to $100 million originally, and then. But so what I'm saying is I don't have a problem with moving money from the CRA to the Housing Trust Fund as long as it's the 20% housing money. I have a problem with taking it out of economic development money when I'm trying to create jobs.
Councilman, there would be no net gain for the city as a whole if you were going to take.
It'd be a huge gain to my district.
Well, as far as housing is concerned, Councilman, I'm just referring to that amount. The net gain would be zero.
Then you don't have a problem with it. So there's no net loss either.
It's a policy decision. If you're going to take funds out of the 20% to provide the housing, the 20% within the
if you agree that there's no net gain, then you've got to agree there's no net loss.
There would be a loss if you're going to eliminate the 5% reduction out of the 80%. The 20% within the CRA is for housing. So the 5% is above and beyond what is already provided to housing.
I understand that.
Okay. So if we were to
the difference is that the CRA retains my district spent over 30% of its money, my project area spent over 30% of its money on housing this last time. So there's no assumption that there's going to be a loss of that 5%. The only difference is it would be designed in an economic development way.
That's strictly a policy decision, Councilman. All I'm saying is that by switching the funding from the 80% to the 20% is basically reducing the overall contributions to affordable housing.
And that's why I say, Mr. Chairman, what I am recommending is that we either carve out our project area so that we can work with the CRA and the Housing Department to craft an agreement that works well in one of the largest project areas, or we agree to move all of the money, 5% money, from the 20% set aside in CRA. Otherwise, we're taking economic development dollars out of the project areas, and our ability to create jobs is hindered. Notwithstanding the jobs that are created on housing projects, they're not permanent jobs. They're construction jobs or temporary, whereas we could get the benefit of both construction jobs on economic development projects as well as permanent jobs that are retained. So, I'm not ready to, I can't support this as it's recommended by the CLA. Unless we change these two provisions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Alarcon. Mr. Cardenas and then Mr. Reyes.
Yes, basically, as you stated, this is a policy decision. So whatever happened with previous legislatures doesn't bind future legislatures. That's why you're here before us with a recommendation, and the CLA has analyzed it, and they've given us their 2 cents about what they feel about it with technical changes or what have you, and it's not a bad thing, and it's within the law and all those caveats. But what I hear Councilmember Alarcon saying is when we look at the history of the movement of the 20% committed within CRA for housing, and then the 5% to bolster the housing department's ability to have more funds to dedicate to housing, we're looking at 25% of money that normally is for CRA areas that go for housing / and or economic development. And by this movement, basically, on paper, it appears that we are bolstering LA City's ability to have more housing dollars, create a nexus between an impetus and an effort to have more successful projects for subsidized housing. However, when I look at it from my vantage point, and I think Councilmember Alarcon agrees with this vantage point, in the San Fernando Valley, when you look at a 3-year period, a 5-year period, a 10-year period, we always end up shaking our head saying, there it goes again. Other parts of Los Angeles are benefiting from the tax increment dollars that actually began in the valley, in our area. And when you talk about a 5-year agreement, and then the first 2 years it needs to be spent within that area, and then the second 2 years there's flexibility to be spent outside that area, and in the 5th year whatever money isn't spent is really unfettered. It can be applied and assigned to any area, and obviously a justifiable project, but it doesn't have to adhere to the area in which the money came from. So yes, go ahead.
I'd like to make a technical correction on that. The 5th year is really meant for the money going from the LHD 5% set aside back to the agency, back to the project area from which it came, to be used for redevelopment purposes. So it could be used for economic development or other CRA activities.
But controlled by CRA in the 5th year,
Controlled by
not
CRA.
by housing.
Correct.
Okay,
So
thank
year
you.
5, it comes back to the agency, goes back to the project area, is treated as project area tax increment.
Okay, but however, why even make it that complicated? If we're going to agree as policymakers to go ahead and shift dollars from CRA under the purview of housing for the purpose of housing projects, why, at least from my vantage point, why would I agree that we should have any flexibility beyond making sure that we spend it in an area that it was generated from or an area adjacent to it where we can prove that there's a nexus? That's where I'm coming from.
Right. So the intent of this, and I won't speak to Anne Marie, but one of the reasons that the CRA agreed with the recommendation and with the modification was that we have looked at the 6-year history of how money has been allocated, and I'll just use your district as a example. There's been $5.7 million allocated from the Pacoima area to the trust fund since FY03. Of that, all but $1.1 million has been committed to projects. There's been 6 projects within that area. One project was in FY09, so that's the most recent project. It was the Montecito Heights project. So when you look at the ability to, and let me just counter with another example. In Laurel Canyon is one of those contributing areas that has contributed approximately $3 million to the fund, but only, and all of it has been spent, and it's been spent on 2 projects, one through a finding of benefit, and there were no housing projects in Laurel Canyon. That's one of the reasons that Laurel Canyon is being taken out of the equation, because it's mostly a commercial area and it doesn't make sense to have it contribute towards a housing activity which doesn't happen in Laurel Canyon. So the idea under the current agreement would be that if the $1.1 million remained unspent in the third year, then we would look to create a finding of benefit in and around the region, not any other, not South Los Angeles, not the east side, not downtown, but the region, the East Valley region, and use that money within the East Valley region. So it wouldn't be going outside of the Valley jurisdiction, it would stay within the East Valley region.
Well, I appreciate that clarification, but as I read the language, I'm not comfortable with the flexibility that you just described. I see it a little bit differently, and with all due respect, I have not necessarily agreed with the way either department has, on certain nuances, applied the language and the interpretation of how dollars should be used or spent. The fact that $3 million didn't get used from one project area or what have you, God bless whatever part of the city wants to use that money for housing. I hope it gets put to good use, but I'm not interested in on a broad-based policy on this day saying that we should go ahead and move this item the way it's written. And I wasn't inclined to agree to a carve-out like Councilmember Alarcon talked about, but to make it simple for the rest of the city, if y'all want to do whatever you want to do, go ahead and do it, carve out our area, and, have at it. And then maybe we can even use it as a comparison analysis, and 5 years later, we can look at it and say, wow, that was a dumb idea, or, look how it played out. It played out just like Alarcon and Cardenas thought it would, or maybe we were wrong. But the bottom line is, at the same time, it's really unfortunate that there are projects going on in this city that haven't even got off the ground, that sucked up a lot of housing dollars and CRA dollars, et cetera, that to this day haven't even got off the ground. And they're not in my area. Those projects aren't in my area. But, so the bottom line is, I'm not comfortable with this for a lot of the reasons that were pointed out by Councilmember Alarcon. And in addition to that, I have another question when it comes to the permanent supportive housing program. Can you remind us what the council involvement would be in that based on what we have here?
The current way in which the permanent supportive housing program is operated, well, I'm sorry, last year's program was operated. It was outside of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and the money allocated to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund from the CRA would not be utilized under the permanent supportive housing program. The Board of Commissioners at the CRA recommended that whatever contribution we make would be both available to the trust fund as well as the permanent supportive housing program. The CLA has made a recommendation not to do that and has denied that request, and ultimately we're okay with that. We believe in permanent supportive housing. We contribute to permanent supportive housing on our own using our 20% set-aside money. We just thought it would be easier to utilize the 5% set-aside money, but we're okay if it doesn't happen that way. We still support permanent supportive housing and the collaboration among the Housing Authority, the LHD, and us to create a permanent supportive housing.
Well, I just want to go on the record, since you said it several times that the CRA supports permanent supportive housing. Well, so does Councilmember Tony Cardenas, regardless of what changes the CLA may be recommending from the proposal coming out of the CRA and the Housing Department.
And Councilman, if I just may, just for the most recent NOFA that was released, the total of $18 million was made available for permanent supportive housing.
Mm-hmm. So the Housing Department supports permanent supportive housing as well? Okay.
Absolutely.
Record. All right.
We just to clarify really quickly, our recommendation was just basically, because there is a separate agreement, that should be handled through that. To stick with this would be the Affordable Housing Trust Fund piece, but because there is this other MOU, that any changes be dealt with under that cooperation agreement.
Thank you. Of course. So with that, if the rest of the members are comfortable with the language as recommended by the CLA, y'all can go forward. As far as I'm concerned, I agree with Councilmember Alarcon that, if we carve out our area, the rest of the city can enjoy, this agreement and then play it out as written. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Mr. Reyes.
What is the input from the federal government, HUD? How is this agreement being received? has there been any discourse with HUD representatives and/or the federal government? Can anybody answer that question?
Not that I'm aware of.
No.
So we're putting together a 5-year agreement, or what remains of a 5-year agreement, through these new formulas, and no one's spoken to the federal representatives who will be looking at what we're doing to assess whether we're going to be getting funding in the future or not, or how it matches, or how it is leveraged with their goals and how they see infusion of dollars into major cities like Los Angeles?
Well, as currently, the funding formula works, it's predicated on the constituent base and not necessarily the performance of the recipient and how they utilize the home dollars.
What I'm asking is a political question.
Understood.
Are we in touch with, did we get any feedback? Was there any sense of responsiveness to what we're doing here? Is there any kind of posturing that we should be aware of?
Well, there was the 5-year plan that was created by the mayor's office. It was presented to the committee and council. I believe it was received and filed several years ago. To that end, there has been no real formal release of data against that 5-year plan.
So then I have a series of questions that begs, and again, I asked this several months ago in this committee. I needed to understand how the priorities were being addressed. Are we still focused on preservation of affordable housing? The foreclosure issue has not gone away. I respect my colleagues and what they're saying from the Northeast Valley, but I think we should be looking at ourselves as one city. And so for us to be able to have a strong position in being competitive in receiving federal grants, we should be treating ourselves as one city. And how that is going to reflect on our ability to service Northeast, to service South LA, South Central, East, Northeast. It's going to be a reflection of how they want to work with us. So if we go in there unorganized with a balkanized effort in a city that is in real deep trouble, what is our presentation?
Right. And I'll just move to one more thing. First of all, the Health Department, I'm certain CRA would agree that we certainly need to tell the story for the city and how we are addressing the homeless issues, permanent supportive housing, as well as affordable housing throughout the city, as well as dealing with the foreclosure crisis. Working with the mayor's office, we developed a system that we would track all the data from the 4 agencies and present that in a meaningful method to the constituents, as well as the elected officials, as well as to the federal government, so we can paint the picture and then we can actually gauge where we are relative to achieving those goals and set higher priorities for us.
I'll be brutally blunt. If we were to show, or if they were to see and hear this dialogue now, this morning, they would probably say the city doesn't know what it's doing. They would probably say, why are we going to invest in a city that can't make up its own mind in terms of how it's going to service its constituency with all this division? I have a series of questions I'd like answered, and if you can answer it today or put it in writing, I think it speaks to the 5-year agreement that they assumed we were following. There were certain goals set in year 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. We're going to deviate from that, and it just happens that the previous housing director now is the head, or a very, very strong and influential position with the federal government. Why would we want to stick our finger in their eye? I mean, that doesn't make any sense.
Is that a question or a statement?
That is, well, take it any way you want, but...
No, I want to hear an answer to that question, because I'll answer it for you, but I'd rather have them answer it.
So Councilman, part of what the CRA is doing, we tell our story differently than the Housing Department does when it comes to housing. But we work very collaboratively with them, especially, under this agreement, we really anticipate setting the priorities with LHD so that we can effectuate the 5-year housing plan for the city of Los Angeles. But for our part, let me just address our part. In the 5-year...
You say our part, you're talking CRA.
On the CRA part, I'm sorry. On the CRA behalf, we have a commitment to the 5-year housing plan for a total of $250 million. over the course of the next 5 years. That's an average of $50 million contribution every year. Now, that's broken up into our 20% money. It includes the 5% set-aside money. It also includes, like Councilman Alarcon referenced, some project areas that decide to contribute more than its 20% set-aside and the 5% contribution to LHD towards housing. So there are some project areas that use 30% of its TI towards housing, 35% of its TI towards housing. So our $50 million contribution to the 5-year housing plan is a strong commitment. It's an active commitment. It's something that our administration, our Board of Commissioners strongly supports, and I've been given direction to ensure that our pipeline over the course of the next 4 years, which is the remaining part of this program, or of this plan, is focused on production and the production of housing, so that...
But everything you're explaining, you're saying follows in line with what the 5-year agreement had laid out.
Yes, and the challenge that we're facing at the CRA is twofold. One is that the state is taking our funds through ERAF. We had an $85 million hit in FY10, and FY9 we had a $14 million hit. We are waiting to hear what the legislation...
I don't mean to cut you off, but let me ask this question. Given these new realities, what's happened last year and the past 2 years, did we express and articulate to our federal government representatives, to HUD, that because of these new circumstances, our ability to look at this 5-year plan and how we are to be assessed when we compete, that has to be factored in? Have we had that discussion with them?
When Sean Donovan came out last year in FY9 and the mayor's office met with him to review the housing plan, the 5-year plan, it became an important instrument to really bring home the message that the city of Los Angeles, with all its agencies, the housing department, the CRA, the planning department, and the housing authority, we're all going to work together to contribute a $1 billion commitment towards housing.
Has there been any kind of information from you and your department to let these legislators know the nature of that discussion, the direction of that discussion? Who is going to inform us of that progress?
So we have had several discussions on a couple different fronts with the federal government, not necessarily with Ms. Marquez, but with other aspects of the federal government. Carol Gallant, who is head of the multifamily unit at HUD, has been in constant dialogue with the local HUD office. We have been working with the local HUD office with LHD on a preservation strategy that focuses on preserving the expiring use of 6,000 of our units, of CRA-owned units, where the covenants are going to expire within 5 years, and we're looking towards preserving those 6,000 units. HUD has been a critical role in terms of that. The second part of that...
Can I ask you this question? Is the housing department also allowed or has purview over this conversation?
Yes. So the second part of that is, as Franklin Campos at the housing department has been working on the expiring, the at-risk of conversion part of the preservation strategy. So those are the Section 8 HUD contracts that are expiring, that owners just want to walk away from the HUD contracts. Franklin has been working in a group of preservation activists with the CRA, with them, and with the advocates to figure out a way with HUD how we can extend those Section 8 project-based contracts. That's a huge preservation strategy where we really expect that, about 10,000 units in total are in danger, and if we can focus on that action, that's critical. Now, what that's doing is it's not focusing our resources into that activity, but trying to leverage HUD resources into preserving those units in Los Angeles.
Let me do this for the sake of time. We got 20 minutes, and Mr. Chair is very patient, and thank you for your patience, Mr. Chair. If I could lay out these questions, I'm not sure if they can answer today, but I believe these questions need to be answered to give us a better sense of what the impact of this decision would mean.
It makes sense to me, Mr. Reyes, and what, given some of the comments and concerns raised by members of this committee, I think that it makes sense that we continue this for probably at least a couple of weeks. You submit your questions and let us have some discussions to see if we can, close this gap where it relates to the opinion on this committee, and then we'll take it from there. But it's obvious that this is not cooked enough for us to serve it yet, so.
And if I may ask, Mr. Chair, is there a way
Look, you got
to,
the wrong ingredients.
is there a way to get a better sense of the status and nature of our conversations with our federal representatives? That's something that I believe our offices should be more in tune with. It'll allow us a greater sense and understanding of the context of how these decisions are being made, how are we impacting different parts of the city, and how is it going to essentially influence the efficiencies of your capacity to deliver your service, and how we're making those decisions. So for the sake of equity, and not to penalize or take away from any part of the city, but I think it's very, very significant that we represent ourselves as one city. But if we start now tearing apart, setting aside, and it's not going to reflect well on our ability to deliver our services to the city. And why would the federal government mess with a city that is running into each other like the Keystone Cops? It just doesn't make sense.
Certainly, Councilman. Actually, CRA, Ms. Sotelo and myself have spoken about this, and we're going to reach out to the other two agencies, HACLA and LASA. We've already collected the data for the most part. What we need to do is just collectively make sure that we're presenting it correctly in a collective approach and present it to you as to where we are and come up with a strategy as to how we present that to this board on a regular basis.
Okay, Mr. Reyes, did you get all your...
Well, I have the questions in written form. I can submit them, and they can answer. That way we can spend more time on that.
Whatever you can submit it, however you want to play it.
Yeah, I'll write them out. I'll get them to you.
Okay.
For sake of time.
That's fine. Mr. Cardenas, are you comfortable with that? Okay, then...
I just want to...
Yes, Mr. Cardenas.
Verify that, Zine and Parks or Smith are not on here, so the reference to Keystone Cops, I'm assuming you weren't talking about them.
Ouch, ouch, ouch. Never did that cross my mind.
Okay, good. It crossed mine. I just want to get clarification.
Uh-oh. Okay, then, with that statement, lets me know it's about time for us to adjourn. So we'll continue this item for at least a couple of weeks, and I don't believe, Madam CLA, there's any more business. Okay, now, City Attorney, you feel compelled to make a comment? Make it.
Unfortunately, there wasn't an opportunity to say this earlier, but I just wanted to, I believe, I just wanted to restate your last comment with regard to Councilman Alarcon's motion and the hybrid that you're talking about, that the discussions with staff and City Attorney would be consistent with the requirements of the Brown Act.
Gotcha. That's why I said it. Okay, with that, the committee's adjourned.